in order to rescue their trapped teammates from the horde of zombies. A small group of individuals drove a carriage while playing music to lead the zombies away. Now, all they needed to do was lead the zombies to the edge of a cliff to completely eliminate them. As the night slowly descended, the zombie horde was successfully lured away. Most of the people in the factory had also evacuated, leaving only a handful behind. Gabriel instructed them to leave while he stayed behind to provide cover.
Tell her, eres mi media naranja.
Half orange?
Judith didn't understand the meaning behind this, but she was certain she would relay the message. They left soon after. Gabriel picked up his shotgun and aimed it at the entrance, determined to ensure everyone's safe escape, even if it meant risking his own life. Soon enough, the door opened, and the first person to charge in was swiftly taken down by Gabriel's shot. However, there were 4 more individuals following behind. Gabriel is pinned to the ground, and another one of the Whisperers comes up with a knife. Since it's Maggie, she's back, and she just happened to save Gabriel. They held each other tightly, not having seen each other for years. Friends who had once endured hardships together were like family, and being reunited felt truly heartwarming. Meanwhile, Daryl and his group continued moving forward. With the zombie horde now at a considerable distance, the Whisperer doesn't give up easily. The Whisperers charged forward, using zombies as shields, rendering their bows and arrows ineffective. Daryl had no choice but to urge the driver to speed up. The key was to create enough distance so that the Whisperers couldn't threaten them. When this tactic proved ineffective, the Whisperers decided to emerge from the side of the woods, determined to destroy the carriage. Despite successfully thwarting several attacks, they missed one Whisperer who threw an iron cable, accurately disabling one of the carriage wheels. The vehicle was now immobile. With no other option, Daryl had to shout for them to retreat. Staying with the broken vehicle was futile, and they risked becoming zombie fodder. Not to mention the Whisperers were still a looming threat. As soon as they left, the Whisperers jumped on the wagon and stabbed at the speakers, and the music stopped. And so the Whisperers guided the zombies back again. The plan failed, but the zombies had been lured out for so long that the camp had already been evacuated. To prevent any future trouble, Daryl came up with a plan. Since the Whisperers like to manipulate zombies from within the zombie horde, they decided to use the same tactics against the Whisperers. They would stealthily infiltrate their ranks and eliminate them one by one. With these lunatics out of the way, they could then slowly figure out how to lead the zombie horde to the cliff's edge. Ready to take action, the group returned to their camp and concealed themselves within the zombie horde. Their plan was simple. As soon as they spotted the Whisperers, they would launch surprise attacks and swiftly withdraw, leaving no room for retaliation. Beta began to sense that something was amiss as screams erupted from various directions, and one by one, his followers were assassinated. He never expected that one day, his enemies would employ their own tactics against them. The irony was not lost on him. At that moment, a figure passed by Beta, whispering the word Alpha as she did so. It was Lydia, intentionally baiting Beta. Beta, seeing the Alpha mask, drew his knife and prepared to give chase. But as Beta turned, he was in for a surprise. Negan stood right in front of him. The anger in his heart was instantly ignited, and he didn't care to hide his body anymore. The person Beta wanted to kill the most was this bastard. Just as Beta was about to strike, Daryl arrived from the side. Zombies in the vicinity were drawn to the commotion. What's even scarier is that even though the double blades pierced Beta's head, he's still alive creepily. However, his consciousness was fading as he saw Alpha's image in his mind. Recalling their first encounter and their journey together, countless zombies pounced on Beta's body. He didn't suffer. Instead, he opened his arms and embraced, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He's always believed in the Alpha saying, "Step into the darkness and you'll be free." In this moment he was free. Negan got a good look at the massive man's face and was shaken to discover that he was a pre-apocalypse superstar. Early in the morning, the zombies head towards the cliffs. This happened because Lydia was guiding the zombies in the way her mom taught her. Lydia most likely wouldn't survive this, as the zombies would eventually push her off the cliff. But she had no regrets. Surviving in this world had been exhausting. As they neared the cliff, Carol approached from behind Lydia. The woman had a conscience. In fact, it's partly her fault that it's come to this. Even Daryl doesn't really talk to her anymore. The cliff was now in sight. Carol stepped onto it, awaiting the approaching zombie horde. She thought a lot about this moment. Maybe if she left them they'd be hurt less. The one who lived with a mask was always herself. Suddenly, a hand grabbed Carol, attempting to pull her back. Lydia was really good. Carol not only used her, but also instigated Negan to kill her mom. It had taken Lydia a long time to come to terms with this. One by one, tens of thousands of zombies walk off the cliff. Half an hour later, only the two of them remained on the cliff. This signaled the end of the Whisperers era, as the zombie horde could no longer pose a threat to them. On the other side, the evacuees from the plant are regrouping in the woods. Having survived makes them feel good. Maggie was also catching up with them, and it couldn't be denied that her demeanor had improved significantly. She exuded a confident and poised charm in every gesture and word. Then Judith arrived. Maggie turned to look, instantly recognizing Judith. The last time she saw Judith, she was still very small, but she has grown up so much. After a while, Carol and Lydia also returned, finally putting Daryl's anxious heart at ease. They knew the zombie horde had fallen into the cliff, and everyone was extremely excited. They could hardly believe what they had achieved, and this feat would surely go down in the annals of their civilization. Daryl still cares about Carol. It's just that what Carol did made him angry, but he's letting it go now. They're back together again. In this ever-changing post-apocalyptic world, they still had each other. Subsequently, the group began packing their belongings, preparing to return to the Alexandria safe zone. Maggie was in a good mood as they walked along, catching up on old times. Maggie's expression froze when the carriage drove away and revealed Negan. How had this guy been set free? Negan felt somewhat awkward as memories of the past flooded his mind. Maggie didn't say anything but just left without expression. She even had the urge to do it directly. She could never forgive or forget Glenn's death. In the woods, Daryl and Carol discussed the allocation of personnel. The hilltop had fallen, and its residents would be distributed to the other two communities. Maggie soon joined them, accompanied by two unfamiliar faces. She explained that they were from her new community. The bearded man had just arrived from their camp and was reporting on the situation there. Confirming that everything was fine, Maggie went on to introduce her team members. The bearded man was Elijah, and the masked man was Cole. She also shared their experiences during this period. Maggie had been invited by Georgie to help other survivors and had eventually become the leader of this team. However, their small town had been overrun. Maggie plans to bring the residents to the hilltop to settle down. Carol and Daryl both looked a bit strange after hearing that. They could only take Maggie to see for herself the state of the hilltop. As they passed through the woods and the hilltop came into view, all they saw were dilapidated fences where once a thriving community had stood. It's all gone, and Maggie's heart is sad because she's put so much work into this place. Maggie knew Carol well enough to guess what had happened at once. Maggie's mood had soured significantly, and she swiftly left the area. She had to pick up her son and her companions, who could only join the Alexandria safe zone. Daryl was so worried about Maggie that he decided to accompany them. Kelly followed Daryl, wanting to find his sister Connie in places he hadn't been before. Maggie didn't say a word on the way, just kept walking. She had nowhere to vent her frustration. It wasn't until the following day, around noon, that they drew closer to their destination. However, as they walked, Daryl suddenly noticed a thick column of smoke rising in the distance. Maggie's heart sank. That seemed to be where her people had landed. As they burst out of the woods, it was confirmed that their temporary camp was indeed in trouble. Maggie, frantic with worry for her son, sprinted ahead. They soon arrived at the scene. The houses had been consumed by the raging fire, and thick smoke hung in the air. Maggie was in a state of extreme anxiety, fearing what she might find among the ruins. Cole came over to report that they had found something outside. When they followed him, they discovered the bodies of two adults, their fellow companions. Maggie, though anxious, was able to calm down and stabilize the army. That's why she's the leader. Daryl, on the other hand, noticed footprints on the ground, both from adults and children. It suggested that Herschel and the others had escaped. Heading north, Maggie blames herself. She's afraid something will happen to Herschel. 10 minutes later, the chaotic footprints split into two directions, and Herschel's tiny footprints were no longer visible. It appeared they had separated, with an adult carrying the child. They decided to split into two groups to track them down as quickly as possible. If they encountered the Reapers, their primary goal was to survive. Daryl and Maggie formed one group, while Kelly joined Cole and Elijah in the other. They agreed to rendezvous at this location if they found the missing people. For now, their only hope was that the escaped individuals were still alive. After they had walked a distance, Daryl seemed to notice something unusual and signaled for Maggie to wait in place. The forest was Daryl's domain, and he was attuned to every rustle and movement. Daryl approached cautiously to investigate, unaware that a pair of eyes were watching him from a distance. There were others concealed in the woods as well, unbeknownst to him. As it turned out, these were their own people. The woman looked at Daryl with a sense of grievance. She had narrowly escaped death moments ago. Maggie hurriedly asked them what had happened. The woman, her voice trembling, explained that everything had started normally, but suddenly a fire broke out, claiming the lives of 2 people. They had fled into the woods, and during their escape, someone had been captured. However, they hadn't seen who was responsible. A man standing nearby expressed righteous anger, asserting that it was undoubtedly the damned work of the Reapers, who intended to hunt them down one by one. Before the woman could continue, something unexpected occurred. Daryl quickly scanned the area, trying to locate the hidden sniper, but ultimately found nothing. They had no choice but to move swiftly within the forest to avoid becoming sitting ducks. After running for a while, they decided to split up once more. This time, they didn't get far before Maggie and Daryl realized that the sniper didn't seem to be shooting at them anymore. It was likely that they were pursuing the other 2 individuals. In that case, all they have to do now is to find out where that bastard is. Otherwise, everyone's life will be in danger. At this time, a woman's scream came from the distance. Maggie felt bad. Sure enough, the woman had been impaled in the abdomen, writhing in pain on the ground when Maggie and Daryl arrived. They hid behind a tree. Observing the scene, Daryl instantly realized that the assailant had intentionally left her alive to lure them closer. He whispered this to Maggie, just as they were discussing their plan. Another woman, drawn by the screams, approached. Both Maggie and Daryl were incensed, their anger boiling over as they wished for nothing more than to exact revenge on the sniper. Maya was already having a hard time speaking. She was gesturing towards Maggie with her hands. It was clear she was trying to convey that she had seen Herschel in the vicinity. After making her gestures, Maya breathed her last. Maggie decided not to wait any longer. She planned to approach from the side while Daryl would be ready to pinpoint the attacker's location and counterattack if they were detected. With a bow and arrow in hand, Maggie cautiously closed the distance. However, this time, the sniper didn't fire a shot. Soon, Maggie spotted the barrel of a rifle, but the sniper was nowhere to be found. Maggie would never have thought that if the sniper hadn't run out of bullets, she would never have been able to feel her way here. The sniper was hiding in a position she couldn't imagine. Maggie just came here. Luckily, she reacted fast enough to dodge the attack in time, and backhanded the knife into the man's chest. However, this man was extraordinarily strong. He effortlessly threw Maggie aside and nonchalantly removed the knife. Just as Maggie was retreating, she inadvertently stepped into a trap set on the forest floor. The man, holding a knife, began to advance towards her, and Maggie urgently tried to free herself from the ropes that bound her. Daryl had arrived at the scene by this point and shot an arrow into the man's abdomen. However, this formidable opponent easily snapped the arrow in half and confronted Daryl. Daryl was thrown to the ground, feeling disoriented from the impact. He caught a glimpse of the man out of his disguise, looking like a cold-blooded killer dressed as a mercenary. He simply stuffed his bandana into his chest to stop the bleeding, and then drew the dagger from the tree trunk. It seemed as though he intended to deal with Maggie first. Maggie had Daryl to buy her time, and she finally broke free of the ropes on her legs. Then she quickly stood up and prepared for the next battle. Before they could make a move, a bow and arrow hit the man. It turned out to be Kelly and the others, along with Maggie's remaining companions. Facing Maggie's questioning, the man was still calm. He just threw the dagger in front of him and threw it on the ground. Everyone assumed that the man was about to confess. However, he did something unexpected. He placed his hand inside his chest. This action caught everyone off guard. What kind of organization would make its members willingly commit suicide?
Get down!
After a while, Maggie reached the location her companions had mentioned and whistled lightly. Her face finally broke into a smile when she saw that her son was unharmed. Daryl, too, wore an expression of mixed emotions. Years had passed since he last saw his best friend's child, and the boy had grown so much. This clever youngster, like Judith, was destined to become a formidable individual. Everyone was exhausted, so Maggie decided they should rest in the vicinity for the night. The next morning, they set off for Alexandria's safe zone and arrived in the afternoon. The Alexandria safe zone was still being rebuilt because it was ravaged by zombies. Negan, who was working, looked out the door, at Maggie to be exact. He knew the feud between them could not be resolved. As for Maggie, she doesn't want her son to carry the same hatred as her, so Herschel only knows that the bad guys killed his father. Not who exactly. 3 days passed, and Maggie and her group settled in. In the community, it was inevitable for Maggie to come across Negan. However, she chose to ignore him for now, as she hadn't decided whether she wanted to kill him. Negan, too, consciously avoided confrontation every time. Carol observed this situation and realized that Negan's presence was causing tension. She made a decision and called Negan outside, ostensibly to go hunting together. Negan naively believed Carol just wanted to ease the awkwardness between him and Maggie, so he was thankful and willing to compromise, saying, "I don't mind keeping a low profile. Carol, you can put in a good word for me. I'll do whatever it takes." However, as they continued walking, they arrived at a house. When Carol opened the door, it was filled with supplies. Negan couldn't help but understand Carol's intentions. Carol explained straightforwardly, "This was decided by the council. You've been exiled from the community." Negan was no fool, and he couldn't possibly believe that this decision was made solely by the council. It was evident that Carol had taken matters into her own hands. Carol smiled brightly, even when her intentions had been seen through, as if to say, "So what?